Welcome back, guys. 80% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Have you ever had nights when you felt like things were going wrong? Nights when all the shadows seemed too dark and all the sounds too loud? October 23rd started that way for me. The night that changed everything I thought I knew about Fort Campbell. My name is Alex Turner, and I've been working here at Fort Campbell for about 18 months now. It's a huge military base that sits between Kentucky and Tennessee. And I mean huge. We're talking over 100,000 acres of training areas, forests, old storage buildings, and a whole lot of empty space in between. During the day, it's all about training, exercises, and the constant sound of helicopters from the 101st Airborne. But at night, Fort Campbell becomes something completely different. "Turner, you copy?" Spike's voice came through my radio, pulling me from my thoughts. "Yeah, I copy. What's up?" "Just making sure you're still awake over there. You've been pretty quiet." I looked at my watch. 10:47 p.m. We'd been on patrol for almost 3 hours, and it was starting to feel boring. Spike, Marcus Reynolds to the officers, but everyone called him Spike, was my patrol partner that night. He was older than me by about 7 years, built like a tank, and had this way of making everything seem like a joke, even when it wasn't. "I'm good," I said, fixing my night vision goggles. "Just looking around." "Looking around?" He laughed. "It's trees and dirt, Turner. Same as it was yesterday. Same as it'll be tomorrow." We were walking through the southern part of the base, an area that most people avoided unless they had to be there. It wasn't dangerous exactly, just forgotten. There were old vehicle storage areas, abandoned training buildings, and miles of overgrown trails that hadn't been used in years. Command kept sending us through here because sometimes people would sneak in. But honestly, I think they just wanted to make sure nothing weird was happening out in the dark. The funny thing is, I didn't know how right they were until later. "Hey, Spike," I called out. "Yeah. You ever hear stories about this part of the base? Like from the soldiers who've been here a long time?" There was a pause. I could see him about 30 meters ahead of me. His shape was barely visible in the dim light. When he finally answered, his voice had changed. Less joking, more serious. "What kind of stories?" "I don't know. Weird stuff. I heard Jenkins talking about it the other day. Something about how guys used to refuse night patrols out here back in the 1980s. Spike stopped walking. I nearly bumped into him before I realized he'd stopped. He turned to face me, and even through the grainy green of my night vision goggles, I could tell he was looking at me carefully. "Jenkins has a big mouth," he said finally, "and an even bigger imagination. So there's nothing to it?" "I didn't say that." He started walking again, but slower now. "Look, every base has its ghost stories. Fort Campbell's been here since World War II. Lots of training accidents over the years, guys getting hurt or worse. People start connecting things that aren't connected, and before you know it, you've got yourself a legend." "But," I said, because I could hear there was more he wanted to say. Spike sighed. "But yeah, this section has a reputation. Nothing official, you understand? Just talk. Guys seeing things that don't make sense. Hearing stuff. Equipment breaking for no reason." He looked back at me. The kind of thing that sounds silly in the daytime, but feels very real at 11 p.m. in the middle of nowhere. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold October weather. "What kind of things?" "The usual spooky stuff. Shadows moving on their own. Sounds that don't match any animal anyone can name. A couple guys a few years back swore they saw something tall, really tall, walking through the trees near the old motor pool." He shook his head. "Command looked into it, found nothing. Said it was just tired soldiers with big imaginations." "Do you think that's all it was?" Spike didn't answer right away. We'd reached a split in the dirt road, and he pulled out his map, checking where we were with his flashlight. The red light made everything look creepy. "Honestly, I don't know what I think anymore, Turner. I've been doing these patrols for 5 years. Never seen anything I couldn't explain." He paused. "But I've felt things. You know what I mean? That feeling when you're absolutely sure someone's watching you, but when you look, there's nothing there." I nodded, even though he wasn't looking at me anymore. I knew exactly what he meant because I was feeling it right then. That prickly feeling on the back of your neck, the way your body gets tense without you telling it to. Every instinct screaming that you're not alone. "We're heading to the old depot, right?" I asked, trying to focus on the job. "Yeah, Section 7 Delta. Command wants us to check it out. Make sure no one's been sneaking around. Apparently, they've had reports of lights out here." "Lights? Like what? Flashlights?" "Don't know. Could be kids. Could be people looking for metal to sell. Either way, we check it out, report back, and then we're done for the night." The old motor pool depot was about a 20-minute walk from where we were. I'd seen it on maps, but never actually been there. From what I understood, it was a group of storage buildings and a huge garage where they used to keep vehicles before they built the newer buildings closer to the main base. It had been closed down sometime in the 1990s, and now it was just one more forgotten corner of Fort Campbell's huge area. As we walked, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees here were old, thick oaks and maples that created a roof so thick that even moonlight couldn't get through. Our footsteps crunched on fallen leaves, each sound loud in the quiet. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and I found myself grateful for the familiar sound. It was proof that we weren't completely alone out here, that nature was still doing its thing, not caring about whatever fears we had. "You married, Turner?" Spike asked suddenly. The question surprised me. "What? Married? You got someone waiting for you back home?" No. I mean, I've got a girlfriend, Sarah. She's back in Ohio." "Long distance, huh? That's tough." "Yeah, we make it work." I wasn't sure why he was asking. "What about you?" "Divorced," he said matter-of-factly. 3 years now. She couldn't handle the deployments, the weird hours, all of it. Can't say I blame her. He looked back at me. "My advice. If this Sarah of yours is willing to stick around through all this military stuff, you hold on to her. Don't take it for granted." "I won't," I said, though I wondered why he was suddenly getting deep on me. "Good." He stopped again, and this time I could see why. Through the trees ahead, barely visible in the darkness, were the shapes of buildings. "We're here." The depot looked exactly like what it was, a leftover from a different time. 3 large warehouse-style buildings formed a rough U-shape around a central courtyard. And off to one side, I could see what was left of what must have been the main garage. Chain-link fencing, mostly fallen down now, surrounded the whole area. Rusted signs warned people to stay out. Their words faded, but still readable in the glow of our flashlights. "Looks cheerful," I muttered. "Yeah, real homey." Spike moved forward, his rifle at the ready. "Stay sharp. If there are people in there, they might not be friendly." We walked up to the main gate, or what was left of it. The chain that had once locked it lay on the ground, so rusted it was useless. Spike pushed the gate open with one hand. The metal screamed loudly. The sound echoed across the area, and I found myself getting even more tense. Nothing moved. "Raptor 1 to base. We're at the depot," Spike said into his radio. "Starting our search now." "Copy, Raptor 1, came the reply. Lieutenant Harper's voice was calm, even bored. "Report anything you find. Should take about 30 minutes. "Understood. Raptor 1 out." 30 minutes. That's all we needed to do. Walk through the buildings, make sure they were empty, and then get out of here. Simple. Except nothing about this place felt simple. We entered the courtyard, our boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The buildings surrounded us, their windows dark and empty like hollow eye sockets. I moved my rifle from left to right, my finger resting alongside the trigger. Not on it. Not yet. "Which one first?" I asked. Spike thought about it. "Left one. We'll work our way around." The building on our left had once been painted white, but decades of being abandoned had left it a moldy gray-brown. The main door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze that had picked up. Inside, I could see shapes, old furniture, equipment, shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. "After you," Spike said, which I appreciated. It meant he'd be covering our backs. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Mildew, rust, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something organic and wrong. I forced myself to breathe through my mouth as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. Even with night vision, the inside was a maze of stuff. Overturned desks, filing cabinets with their drawers hanging open, papers scattered everywhere like autumn leaves. "Clear left," I called out softly, checking a small office. "Clear right," Spike responded from somewhere behind me. We moved through the building carefully, room by room. It was slow, boring work, the kind that gives your imagination way too much time to think. Every shadow could be a person. Every sound could be danger. But we found nothing. Just decades of being abandoned and falling apart. "Building 1 clear," Spike announced when we'd finished. On to number 2. The second building was much the same. More offices, more junk, more emptiness. By the time we finished checking it, I was starting to relax a little. Maybe this was just a normal patrol after all. Maybe Jenkins really was making up stories. That's when we heard it. A sound, distant but clear, coming from the direction of the third building. A metallic clang, like someone had knocked over a piece of equipment. Spike and I froze, our eyes meeting in the darkness. "You heard that?" I whispered. He nodded, raising his rifle. "Third building. Let's go." But slow. Could be an animal. Could be... I agreed, though I didn't believe it. We walked toward the final building much more carefully than the first two. This one was larger, probably the main storage warehouse. The doors were closed, but they weren't locked. Spike reached out and pulled one open just enough for us to slip through. The inside was huge, one big open space broken up by support columns and rows of metal shelving units. Some still had boxes and equipment, while others were completely empty. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, creating strange dancing patterns on the walls. "Hello," Spike called out. "This is U.S. Army security. If anyone's in here, you need to show yourself now." His voice echoed through the space, bouncing off walls and ceiling before fading into silence. No response. We moved deeper into the warehouse, splitting up slightly to cover more ground. I could see Spike about 10 meters to my right, his light sweeping back and forth smoothly. Professional, controlled. That's when I saw the footprints. They were in the dust on the floor, clearly visible in the beam of my flashlight. But they weren't normal footprints. They were huge, easily twice the size of my own boot prints, and they didn't match any military footwear I'd ever seen. The pattern was wrong. Too organic somehow, almost like... "Spike," I hissed. "You need to see this." He was next to me in seconds, his light joining mine on the floor. I watched his body language change, saw the way his grip tightened on his rifle. "What the hell?" he muttered. The footprints led deeper into the warehouse, toward the back wall. Without talking about it, we both started following them. I knew it was probably stupid. This is exactly the kind of thing they tell you not to do in scary movies. But we were soldiers, and this was our job. Besides, what were we going to do? Call it in and say we found big footprints? They'd laugh at us. The prints led us to a section of the warehouse that was even more cluttered than the rest. Old vehicles, some stripped down to their frames, others looking almost complete. A whole group of forgotten machines slowly rusting away. And there, at the very back, partially hidden behind an old Humvee, was something that made my blood run cold. It was a shelter of some kind. Not military. Crude, handmade, built from scavenged materials. Tarps, pieces of metal sheeting, even what looked like old uniforms, all woven together to create a space roughly the size of a small room. And in front of it, arranged with disturbing care, were bones. Not animal bones. I'd seen enough of those during training to know the difference. These were too big, too regular, too deliberately placed. "Holy crap," Spike breathed. "Is that, we need to call this in?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Right now." Spike nodded. But before he could reach for his radio, we heard something that froze us both in place. Breathing. Heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from inside the shelter. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, something moved in the darkness beyond our lights. Something massive. I want to tell you that we acted like trained soldiers, that we stayed calm and followed our training. But the truth is we both took a step backward without thinking. our rifles snapping up to our shoulders, fingers moving to triggers. "Identify yourself," Spike shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Come out now with your hands visible." The breathing stopped for a moment. Everything was silent. So silent I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Could hear the whisper of Spike's finger tightening on his trigger. Then came a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. A low rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself, through my bones, through everything. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I'd ever heard. It was something else. Something ancient and wrong and absolutely terrifying. "Spike," I started to say. That's when it came out. Eyes in the dark. I've tried to describe what we saw that night to other people since then. Tried to put it into words that make sense, that show how absolutely wrong it was. But I can't find the right words every time. How do you explain something that shouldn't exist? It stood at least 12 feet tall, maybe more. In the darkness and confusion, it was hard to tell for sure. But when it straightened up fully, its head nearly touched the warehouse ceiling. The shape was like a human, but everything about it was bigger, stretched out. Long arms that hung past where its knees should be, shoulders so broad they seemed impossible. And the smell, God, the smell that came from it was like rotting meat mixed with wet dog and something else, something ancient and wild. But it was the eyes that really got me. They caught our flashlight beams and reflected them back, glowing a sickly yellow-green in the darkness. Smart eyes, aware eyes, eyes that were studying us just as much as we were frozen in terror studying it. "Fall back," Spike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Slowly. Don't run." Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do exactly the opposite, to turn and run for the exit as fast as my legs could carry me. But Spike was right. Running makes predators chase you. And whatever this thing was, it was definitely a predator. I could see that in the way it moved, the way it put itself between us and the exit. We started backing up, one careful step at a time. Our weapons still pointed at the creature. It didn't move, just stood there watching us with those terrible glowing eyes. The only sound was its breathing, that deep rumbling sound that seemed to fill the entire space. "What is that thing?" I whispered. "Doesn't matter," Spike said. "Just keep moving." We'd made it maybe 10 feet when the creature suddenly moved. Not toward us, thank God, but to the side, positioning itself behind one of the support columns. It was trying to circle around us to cut off our escape route. The fact that it was smart enough to do that was almost more terrifying than its size. "Faster," Spike hissed. "Move faster." We picked up our pace, still facing the direction where we'd last seen it. But the creature had disappeared into the shadows. Only the sound of its breathing gave away where it was, and even that seemed to be moving, circling us in the darkness. "Raptor 1 to base," Spike said into his radio, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We have a situation at the depot, requesting immediate backup." "Raptor 1, say again. What's the nature of your situation?" Spike and I looked at each other. "How do you explain this? What do you even say?" "Unknown hostile in the warehouse," Spike said, which was technically true. "Large, possibly dangerous. We need backup now." "Copy, Raptor 1. Backup is on the way. Should be there in 15 minutes. Can you confirm if the hostile has weapons?" 15 minutes? It might as well have been 15 hours. But we had no choice. "Negative on weapons," Spike replied, "but treat as extremely dangerous. Raptor 1 out." We were halfway to the exit when we heard it again. That low rumbling growl, but closer now. Much closer. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and caught a glimpse of something massive moving between the rows of shelving units. The creature was following us, staying alongside our position. "It's hurting us," I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. "Spike is trying to hurt us." "Hurt us where?" That's when I noticed the second set of breathing sounds, coming from a different direction. My blood turned to ice. "There's more than one," I said, my voice cracking. "Jesus Christ, there's more than one." Spike's head snapped around, his light joining mine as we tried to find the second creature. For a moment, I saw it, Just a glimpse of another massive form moving through the shadows on our left side. Then it was gone again. We were being boxed in. "Screw this," Spike said. "On 3, we run for the exit. Don't stop for anything. Ready?" I nodded, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. 1, 2, 3. We ran. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. Pure fear and adrenaline pushed me forward. My legs pumping, my gear rattling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind us, I heard the sound I'd been dreading. The sound of them chasing us. Heavy footfalls that shook the ground, moving impossibly fast for something so large. "Don't look back," Spike yelled, though I wasn't planning to. Looking back would only slow me down. The exit was maybe 30 meters away. 25, 20. Something crashed into the shelving units to my right, sending metal and boxes flying. One of the creatures had tried to cut us off and missed. Or maybe it was playing with us. I didn't want to think about that. 15 meters. I could see the doorway now. That rectangle of slightly less darkness that meant safety, or at least more safety than where we were. 10 meters. Another crash. This time from the left. Closer. Too close. I felt the rush of air as something massive swept past just behind me. Claws or fingers scraped against my backpack, and I nearly stumbled. "Keep going." Spike was right behind me now, covering me even as we ran. 5 meters. We burst through the doorway and into the courtyard. The night air hit my face like a blessing, and for a brief moment, I thought we were safe. Then I heard it again. That breathing, that terrible, unstoppable breathing. They'd followed us out. "The gate!" I shouted, already changing direction. We sprinted across the courtyard, our boots kicking up gravel. The chain-link fence was ahead, and beyond it, the safety of the tree line. If we could just reach the forest, maybe we could lose them. Maybe we could. Something landed in front of us, dropping from above with an impact that left a dent in the ground. I skidded to a halt, nearly running into Spike. The creature, one of them at least, had somehow gotten ahead of us. It must have climbed onto one of the buildings and jumped down. It stood there now, blocking the gate, its massive form outlined against the night sky. Up close, even in the poor light, I could see more details. Its body was covered in matted hair or fur, dark and thick. The face, if you could call it that, was almost human in structure, but stretched out, with a heavy brow and a jaw that stuck out. It was breathing hard, and I realized with a jolt that it had been working hard, chasing us. These things got tired. They could wear out. That meant they were flesh and blood, not some supernatural ghost. Not that the knowledge helped us much at that moment. "Weapons free," Spike said quietly. "If it moves, we shoot." I adjusted my grip on my rifle, trying to control my shaking hands. Behind us, I could hear the second creature coming out of the warehouse. We were trapped between them with nowhere to go. The creature in front of us tilted its head, studying us with those glowing eyes. Then it did something I didn't expect. Took a step backward. "Is it leaving?" I whispered. "Don't," Spike warned. "Don't assume anything." The creature took another step back. And another. It was giving us space, letting us get to the gate. But why? Was it afraid of our weapons? Had it decided we weren't worth the trouble? Or was this some kind of trap? "Move to the gate," Spike ordered. "Slow and steady. Keep your weapon on it." We started forward, moving sideways to keep both creatures in view. The one behind us had stopped at the edge of the courtyard, seemingly happy to just watch. The one at the gate continued backing away, but it didn't leave. It was still there, still watching, still very much a threat. We reached the gate. I kept my rifle trained on the creature while Spike pulled the gate open wide enough for us to slip through. The metal shrieked again, that horrible sound that seemed to carry for miles in the stillness of the night. "Go," Spike said. "I'll cover." I didn't argue. I slipped through the gap and immediately took up a position on the other side, my rifle raised, covering Spike. He backed through a moment later, never taking his eyes off the creatures. And then we ran. We ran through the forest, crashing through bushes, tripping over roots, not caring about noise or staying tactical. We just ran. Behind us, I kept expecting to hear them chasing us, those heavy footfalls catching up. But there was nothing, just the sound of our own ragged breathing and pounding feet. We ran for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes. Finally, when our legs were burning and our lungs were on fire, Spike grabbed my arm and pulled me to a halt behind a group of large oak trees. "Wait!" he gasped. "Wait, listen." We stood there in the darkness, trying to control our breathing, trying to listen. The forest around us was alive with normal sounds. Insects, the rustle of small animals, the distant hoot of an owl. But no heavy breathing, no footsteps. Nothing to show we were still being followed. I think we lost them," I said between breaths. Spike nodded, though he looked as shaken as I felt. Or they let us go. That thought was somehow worse. The idea that those things had chosen to release us, that we'd escaped only because they'd allowed it. What did that mean? Were they smart enough to understand that killing soldiers would bring more soldiers? Or had they simply not been hungry? "We need to get to the checkpoint," Spike said, checking his GPS. "The backup team is probably already at the depot. We need to warn them." He was right. We grabbed our radios. "Raptor 1 to base. Do you copy?" "Static." "Raptor 1 to base. Urgent. Do you copy?" More static. Our radios were working. I could hear the squelch, but we weren't getting through. Too much distance. Too much interference from the terrain. Or maybe something else. "We need to move," I said. "If we can get to higher ground, we might be able to get a signal." We started moving again, but slower now, more controlled. The terror was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold assessment of our situation. We were lost, low on water. Our radios weren't working, and somewhere behind us were creatures that, by all rights, shouldn't exist. "Turner," Spike said after we'd been walking for about 15 minutes. "What we saw back there, I know no one's going to believe us. I'd already thought about that. Even if we made it back, even if we reported everything we'd seen, who would take us seriously? Giant creatures living in an abandoned depot on Fort Campbell? It sounded insane. It was insane. "We saw what we saw," I said firmly. "I don't care if they believe us or not. They'll say it was bears. Or that we were dehydrated. Seeing things. 12-foot-tall bears that walk on 2 legs and use tactics? Sure, Spike. That's totally reasonable." He didn't laugh. Neither did I. There was nothing funny about any of this. We reached the top of a hill, and Spike immediately pulled out his radio again. "Raptor 1 to base. Do you copy?" This time there was a response. Broken, patchy, but definitely a response. "Raptor 1. Broken. Your position." "Lieutenant Harper, this is Sergeant Reynolds," Spike said, speaking slowly and clearly. "We are about 2 kilometers north of the depot. We ran into hostiles and had to leave. The depot is not safe. I repeat, the depot is not safe. Do not send anyone in without heavy backup. Copy. Understand. Hostile. Backup is checking it out. Come back to checkpoint. Over." The signal cut out, but we'd gotten the main message across. Come back to the checkpoint. The backup team was handling the depot. We were to get ourselves out and report in. "You think they'll find anything?" I asked as we started moving again. Spike shook his head. "Those things didn't seem stupid to me. They'll be gone by the time backup arrives. If they're smart enough to build shelter and hunt tactically, they're smart enough to know when to disappear." He was probably right. By the time backup arrived, the depot would be empty again. Just another abandoned building full of junk and shadows. The only evidence would be the shelter we'd seen, the bones, the footprints. And even those could be explained away or dismissed. We walked in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I kept replaying what had happened in my mind, trying to remember every detail. The size of them, the eyes, the way they moved. I knew that if I didn't hold on to these memories clearly, they'd start to blur and change. Already, I was questioning some details. Had the creature really been 12 feet tall, or was it 10? 11? Were those really bones? Or just trash that looked like bones in the darkness and panic? "There," Spike said, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could see lights. the checkpoint, civilization, safety. We came out of the tree line at 1:47 a.m., according to my watch. We'd been in the field for just over 5 hours, though it felt like days. The checkpoint guard, a young private whose name I didn't know, took one look at us and immediately called for his sergeant. "Jesus, what happened to you guys?" he asked as we came up to the gate. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Spike muttered. "Keepers of secrets." We were taken to the checkpoint office, a small building with fluorescent lights that seemed almost painfully bright after hours in the darkness. Lieutenant Harper was already there, along with Sergeant First Class Morrison, our platoon sergeant, and Captain Vance, the company commander. The fact that they'd called out the company commander for this told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking our report, or at least how seriously they were taking it at first. "Sergeant Reynolds, Private Turner," Captain Vance said as we entered. He was a tall man, lean and professional, with eyes that missed nothing. "Sit down. Tell me exactly what happened at that depot." So we did. We told them everything, from the moment we entered the area to our escape through the forest. I watched their faces as we talked, saw the doubt growing with every word. By the time we got to the part about the creatures being 12 feet tall, Captain Vance was openly frowning. 12 feet, he repeated. "You're certain of that measurement?" "Maybe 10, Spike said. "It was dark and we were under stress. But it was big, sir. Definitely not human-sized." "And you say there were 2 of them?" "At least 2. There might have been more." Captain Vance looked at Sergeant Morrison. I could read the message clearly. They thought we were exaggerating or lying or both. "The backup team is at the depot now," Lieutenant Harper said, checking his watch. "They should be reporting back any minute." As if on cue, the radio on the desk crackled to life. "Base, this is Charlie 6. We've finished checking the depot. No hostiles found." "Repeat, no hostiles found." My heart sank. "Did you find the shelter?" Spike demanded. "The bones? The footprints?" There was a pause on the other end. Negative on that, Base. We found some trash and junk that might be what you're talking about, but nothing that shows anyone living there recently. Definitely no footprints." Spike and I looked at each other. They'd cleaned up. Somehow, in the time it took for us to escape and the backup to arrive, the creatures had removed all evidence they'd been there. Or maybe there had been more of them. Others we hadn't seen, who had taken care of it while 2 of them chased us through the compound. "Understood. Charlie 6, Captain Vance said into the radio. "Finish your check and come back to base. Out." He turned back to us, and I didn't like the look on his face. "Gentlemen, I'm going to be direct with you. I believe that you believe you saw something out there. But without physical evidence, and given the stress of night operations in an isolated area, I'm inclined to think there's a simpler explanation for what you experienced." "Sir, with all due respect," Spike started. Captain Vance held up a hand. "I'm not saying you're lying, but human perception can be tricky, especially under stress. Bears can look remarkably large in poor lighting. Shadows can create illusions. The mind fills in gaps with what it expects to see. We know the difference between a bear and what we saw," I said, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I'm sure you do," Captain Vance said, his tone not unkind. "Which is why we're going to do a full investigation. Daylight search of the depot, review of any security footage, everything. If there's something out there, we'll find it. But until then, I need you both to go to medical, get checked out, and then write up detailed reports. Can you do that?" What choice did we have? We nodded. "Good. Sergeant Morrison will take you to medical. And gentlemen, not a word of this to anyone until the investigation is complete. That's an order. The last thing we need is panic spreading through the base over unconfirmed reports. In other words, shut up and let them sweep this under the rug." Medical cleared us physically. No injuries, no signs of being too cold or dehydrated. Nothing that would explain what we'd seen as bad judgment. Psychologically, that was a different story. The medic who examined me kept asking if I was sleeping okay, if I'd been stressed. I knew what he was getting at. He thought we'd cracked, that the isolation and darkness had gotten to us. I didn't blame him. If someone had told me this story a week ago, I would have thought the same thing. Spike and I spent the next 6 hours writing our reports. I've never struggled so hard to put words on paper. Every sentence felt wrong, every description incomplete. How do you write about the impossible? How do you make someone who wasn't there understand the gut-level terror of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist? By the time I finished, the sun was coming up. I watched it through the window of the office building. That slow change of the sky from black to deep blue to orange and gold. A new day. In the daylight, what had happened the night before seemed even more unreal, like a nightmare that fades when you wake up. Except this nightmare had been real. Turner. Spike appeared in the doorway, looking as exhausted as I felt. Come on. They're doing the daylight search now. Captain wants us there. I followed him to the parking lot, where a small group of vehicles was forming. 3 Humvees carrying what looked like an entire platoon plus officers. They weren't taking any chances, even if they didn't believe us. That was something, at least. Lieutenant Harper waved us over to the lead vehicle. You two are riding with me. I want you to point out exactly where everything happened. The drive to the depot felt surreal in daylight. The forest that had seemed so threatening in the darkness now looked ordinary, almost peaceful. Morning sun filtered through the trees. Birds sang, and the whole world seemed to be going about its business as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't been running for our lives through these woods just hours ago. When we arrived at the depot, I felt my stomach clench. Even in daylight, the place had a heavy atmosphere. The buildings looked even more run down than they had through night vision. Their walls stained with rust and mold, their windows gaping like empty eyes. Which building? Captain Vance asked as we got out. The large one, Spike said, pointing. The warehouse at the back. We approached as a group, weapons ready despite the daylight. I found myself tensing as we reached the door, half expecting one of those creatures to come charging out. But there was nothing, just an empty building full of junk and shadows. Inside, soldiers spread out, conducting a thorough search. I led a small team to where we'd seen the shelter, my heart pounding. This was it. This would prove we weren't crazy. The shelter would still be there. The bones. Something to prove our story was true. Except when we reached the back corner, there was nothing. The area where the shelter had been was empty. Not just empty, clean. The vehicles were still there. The shelving units. All the normal junk of an abandoned warehouse. But the shelter was gone. The bones were gone. Even the footprints in the dust had been swept away or covered up. This is where it was, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. Right here. There was a shelter made of tarps and metal sheeting, and bones arranged in piles right in front of it. A young specialist, I think his name was Rodriguez, knelt down and looked at the floor. There's definitely been recent activity here, he said. You can see where the dust has been disturbed. But I'm not finding any physical evidence of anyone living here. They cleaned it up, Spike said flatly. They knew we'd come back with more people, so they removed everything. Captain Vance looked around the area, his face unreadable. Or there was never anything here to begin with, Sergeant Reynolds. I respect your service record, both of yours, but you have to see this from my perspective. 2 soldiers on night patrol in an isolated area report seeing giant creatures. When backup arrives, there's no trace of anything unusual. No footprints, no shelter, no bones. What am I supposed to think? That we're telling the truth, I said, though even I could hear how weak it sounded. We spent another 2 hours searching the depot and the area around it. The soldiers were thorough, I had to give them that. They took photos, even collected some dust samples. But they found nothing that supported our story. Nothing that proved what we'd encountered existed. As we were loading back into the Humvees, I noticed something. One of the specialists was looking at the door frame of the warehouse, the one we'd run through. He called over Sergeant Morrison, and they had a brief conversation that I couldn't hear. Then Morrison called over Captain Vance. I moved closer, trying to see what they'd found. There, on the metal door frame, about 8 feet up, were scratches. Deep gouges in the metal that looked fresh. Morrison was measuring them with a ruler, and I could see his frown deepen as he worked. These are recent, he said. Within the last 24 hours, I'd say. And they're deep. Whatever made these marks had to have significant strength. Captain Vance looked at the scratches himself. Could be from equipment. Maybe someone trying to pry the door open. At 8 feet up? Morrison countered. Sir, the spacing on these marks, they look like claw marks. Or finger marks. There was a long silence. I saw Spike and me exchange a look that said we told you so. Finally, evidence. Something physical that couldn't be explained away. Document it, Captain Vance said finally. Photos, measurements, everything. We'll have forensics take a look. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall of doubt that had been built up around our story. On the ride back, Lieutenant Harper turned to us. Between you and me, he said quietly. I believe you saw something out there. I've been stationed at Campbell for 3 years, and I've heard rumors. Nothing official, nothing you could put in a report. But rumors. Other soldiers seeing things in the remote areas. Things that don't make sense. Why doesn't anyone do anything about it? I asked. Harper shrugged. What would they do? Launch a full-scale search of over 100,000 acres for what? Creatures that might not even exist? That officially don't exist? The Army has better things to do than chase ghost stories. Even if those ghost stories are true? Especially if they're true, Harper said. Think about it. If the Army officially said there are unknown creatures living on Fort Campbell, what happens? Media circus, congressional investigations, environmental groups demanding access. The base becomes unusable for training. So instead, they sweep it under the rug. They file away the reports. They explain away the evidence. And they move on. It made a sick kind of sense. The military is a huge bureaucracy, and bureaucracies are designed to keep things the same. Admitting that 12-foot-tall creatures existed would be too disruptive, too complicated. Better to just pretend it never happened. The next few days were weird. Spike and I were put on leave while the investigation continued. We weren't locked up, but we were strongly encouraged not to leave the area or talk to anyone about what had happened. I spent most of my time in my room, trying to process everything. Sarah called on the second day. Just hearing her voice helped ground me, remind me that there was a normal world out there beyond all the strangeness. You sound tired, she said. Rough week, I said. You have no idea. Want to talk about it? I can't. Not right now. But I promise, when I can, you'll be the first person I tell. She was quiet for a moment. Is this dangerous? What you're doing? I thought about those creatures, the way they'd hunted us through the warehouse, the intelligence in their glowing eyes. Everything in the military is potentially dangerous, I said, which was true, but not really an answer. Just be careful, okay? I worry about you. I will. I promise. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. Would I tell her when this was all over? Assuming it ever was over? Would I share what I'd experienced? Or would I become like those other soldiers Lieutenant Harper had mentioned, the ones who'd seen things and filed away the memories, never speaking of them except in whispers with others who understood? On the fourth day, Spike and I were called back to Captain Vance's office. Sergeant Morrison was there too, along with a civilian I didn't recognize. The civilian was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. Sergeant Reynolds, Private Turner, Captain Vance said. This is Dr. Marcus Holland from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's been reviewing your reports and the evidence we collected from the depot. Dr. Holland nodded to us. Gentlemen, I've spent the last 3 days analyzing everything related to your encounter. The scratch marks on the door frame, the soil samples, the photos. I've also reviewed similar reports from this base and others across the country. Similar reports? I couldn't help but interrupt. You mean other people have seen these things? Holland smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. People have been seeing things they can't explain for as long as there have been people, Private Turner. The question isn't whether they exist. I think your encounter makes it clear that something is out there. The question is what they are and where they came from. He pulled out a folder and opened it on the desk. Inside were photographs, some old and faded, others more recent. They showed massive footprints, damaged equipment, and in one case what looked like a blurry figure in the background of a training photo, too tall, too broad to be human. The main theory, Holland continued, is that these are leftovers of a species we thought was extinct. Gigantopithecus? Possibly, or a related species. They're extremely rare, extremely secretive, and extremely intelligent. They've learned to avoid humans, to hide evidence of their presence, to live in the margins of our world. Bigfoot, Spike said flatly. You're telling us we ran into Bigfoot. I'm telling you that you encountered an unknown primate species of significant size and intelligence, Holland corrected. The term Bigfoot carries a lot of cultural baggage that isn't helpful for serious discussion. But yes, essentially, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The U.S. government, or at least some part of it, knew these things existed. They'd known all along and just let them be. Why aren't you studying them? I asked. Why aren't we trying to protect them or document them or something? Holland closed his folder. Because officially, Private Turner, they don't exist and they need to stay that way. These creatures have survived for thousands of years by staying hidden. If the public became aware of them, if every amateur monster hunter and trophy hunter started searching these forests, it would be catastrophic. Not just for the creatures, but for military operations, environmental preservation, everything. So we're just supposed to pretend this never happened? Spike's voice was hard, angry. No, Captain Vance said. You're supposed to understand that some things are bigger than individual experiences. This base is home to some of the military's most important training operations. It's also apparently home to a species we barely understand. Both can exist together as long as certain boundaries are maintained. You stumbled across one of those boundaries. It won't happen again. How can you guarantee that? I demanded. The depot is being permanently closed, Captain Vance said. Fenced off, declared contaminated with hazardous materials. No one will be going near it. We're also adjusting patrol routes to avoid that entire section. The creatures keep to their territory. We keep to ours. Everyone stays safe. It was a neat solution, I had to admit, but it felt wrong. Like we were covering up something important, something the world should know about. What about our reports? Spike asked. Our detailed reports that document everything we saw? Holland and Vance looked at each other. Those reports have been classified, Vance said. They'll be filed away in a secure location. If anyone asks, you conducted a routine patrol, found evidence of trespassing, and reported it. Nothing more. And if we refuse? I said, though I already knew the answer. Then you'll find your military careers becoming significantly more difficult, Vance said. It wasn't quite a threat, more like a statement of fact. I understand your frustration. I really do. But you need to think about the bigger picture here. We didn't have a choice. We never really had, from the moment those creatures had let us go. From the moment they'd cleaned up their shelter and erased the evidence, this outcome had been inevitable. The system was designed to bury stories like ours, to keep up the illusion that the world was completely understood and mapped out. Spike and I were released from leave the next day. We returned to regular duty, regular patrols, regular life. But nothing felt regular anymore. Every time I went out on night patrol, I found myself looking at the darkness with new eyes, wondering what else was out there watching us. Every unexplained sound made me tense up. Every shadow seemed deeper, more threatening. The official report said that we had found evidence of civilian trespassers at the old depot and had chased them into the woods before losing contact. The scratches on the door frame were called vandalism. The soil samples showed nothing unusual. Our psychological evaluations were marked as fine, with a note recommending standard stress counseling for both of us. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Not really. Not for those of us who knew the truth. About a month after it happened, I ran into Jenkins, the soldier who Spike had mentioned telling ghost stories. We were at the store on base, and when he saw me, his expression changed, like he recognized something in my face. You saw them, didn't you? He said quietly. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. Yeah, I did. He nodded slowly. I saw one too about a year ago. Different part of the base, but same thing. Nobody believed me either. How many of us are there? I asked. How many soldiers have seen these things? Jenkins shrugged. More than you'd think. Less than there should be, if you know what I mean. Most people don't talk about it. They don't want to be called crazy or unreliable. But if you know who to talk to, if you know the right questions to ask, you'll find us. The ones who know. He gave me a name then, a sergeant who ran an unofficial group. Soldiers who'd had experiences they couldn't explain. They met sometimes, quietly, off base, just to talk, to share stories, to remind each other that they weren't alone. I went to one of those meetings. So did Spike. We listened to stories that ranged from the weird to the terrifying. A soldier who'd seen something massive swimming in one of the base's remote lakes. Another who'd found tracks in the snow that stopped suddenly, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. A specialist who swore she'd heard voices in a language she didn't recognize, coming from deep in the woods where no one should have been. Were all these stories true? I don't know. Probably not all of them. But some of them had that ring of truth that I recognized from my own experience. The kind of truth that changes you. It's been 6 months now since that night at the depot. I'm still stationed at Fort Campbell, still doing my job, still going out on patrols. But I'm different now. More aware, more careful, more accepting of the fact that the world contains mysteries we may never solve. Sarah and I are still together. I told her everything eventually. She believed me, or at least she said she did. Maybe that's enough. Sometimes belief is an act of faith, not fact. I think about those creatures sometimes, wonder where they are, what they're doing. Are they still out there in the remote corners of Fort Campbell, living their hidden lives? Or have they moved on, finding some other isolated place to call home? I like to think they're still there, still surviving in the margins, reminding us that for all our technology and civilization, we don't have this world figured out as well as we think we do. The depot remains closed, surrounded by new fencing and warning signs about hazardous materials. I drove past it once, a few weeks ago, just to see. The buildings looked smaller in daylight, less threatening. But I could still remember the terror of that night, the sound of heavy breathing in the darkness, the way those yellow-green eyes had studied us with such intelligence. And I remembered something else, something I haven't told anyone, not even Spike. As we were running through the forest that night, during those few seconds when I looked back despite knowing I shouldn't, I saw one of the creatures clearly. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, not chasing us anymore, just watching. And in that brief moment, I could have sworn it raised one massive hand. Not in threat, not in warning, in farewell. Like it was acknowledging us, one intelligent species to another. Like it was saying, "You saw me. You know I exist. Now go and keep that knowledge safe." I did. We all did. Those of us who know the truth about Fort Campbell, about what lives in the forgotten corners of this huge base, we carry that knowledge quietly. We don't talk about it publicly. We don't try to convince the doubters or convert the non-believers. But we know. And on nights when I'm on patrol and the darkness seems especially deep, when I hear a sound that doesn't quite match any known animal, when I catch a glimpse of something moving just beyond my flashlight's reach, I remember. I remember that we share this world with things we don't understand. Things older than our civilization. Things that have learned to hide in plain sight. The night shift at Fort Campbell isn't just about guarding against human threats. It's about respecting boundaries we didn't know existed. It's about accepting that some mysteries should remain mysteries. Because sometimes the things we don't know are what keep us humble, keep us honest, keep us human. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the whole world seems to be holding its breath, I think about Dr. Holland's words about how these creatures have survived for thousands of years by staying hidden. And I wonder what it costs them to remain invisible in a world that increasingly has no room for secrets. We owe them that much, I think. Those of us who've seen them, who know they're real, we owe them their privacy, their survival, their right to exist away from our prying eyes and endless curiosity. So I keep their secret. We all do. And every night as I head out on patrol, I carry that weight with me. The weight of knowing, the weight of silence, the weight of having seen something that changed everything. My name is Alex Turner, and I'm a soldier at Fort Campbell. And I'm telling you this story not to convince you that giants exist, or that mysterious creatures are real, or that there's some massive government conspiracy. I'm telling you this because sometimes the things that happen to us in the dark are more important than what happens in the light. The moments that test us, that challenge our understanding of reality, that force us to face the fact that we don't have all the answers, those moments matter. And if you've ever had one of those moments, if you've ever seen something you couldn't explain or experienced something that defied logic, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that strange mix of fear and wonder, doubt and certainty. You know that sometimes the most important truths are the ones we can never prove. So the next time you're out at night and you hear something moving in the darkness just beyond your vision, and every instinct tells you that you're being watched by something unknown, remember this story. Remember that you're not alone, that others have been where you are, have felt what you're feeling. And remember that some mysteries are meant to stay that way. Stay safe out there, and keep your eyes open,